Alter Ego by A. Bertram Chandler. This story only ever appeared in the March 1945 issue of Astounding Science Fiction magazine. For those who are new to Chandler's work, the character John Grimes is often seen as a representation of the author's own experiences and personality, acting as his alter ego and leading the cast of characters in Chandler's space opera novels. Grimes is a captain in the survey service, a skilled and resourceful leader, mirroring some of Chandler's own seafaring background and leadership experiences. Here, his characters take a close look at the fourth wall, but do not break it, and otherwise serve a similar purpose as Grimes and his crew. Read by Darrell T. Smith II for my channel, Quasar Spectra. Alter Ego. Is there time? At first, it was only a little voice at the back of Quentin Dale's mind, but as he worked with cold desperation, his fingers hampered by the thick gloves of his spacesuit, it seemed to swell to a mighty roar. Is there time? Now the very stars were shouting it, and the jagged, contorted rocks that made the barren landscape of the little world on which his ship, Red Star, had crashed. Doggedly, he worked on, forcing himself not to look up from his blueprints, his makeshift tools, his even more makeshift materials, to scan the black sky for the fast-approaching cruisers of the Aryan Navy. For there was more than the life of Quentin Dale at stake, far more than the continued existence of one, hitherto obscure, officer of the Free Martian Naval Intelligence. For unless Dale delivered to his superiors the plans of the weapon that he was now trying to assemble, the Free Martian Republic would be blasted from the surface of its arid world, and the crooked cross wave over every world of the system. "A magnet," muttered Dale. "Where can I find one?" The converter, of course." As he straightened his back, the reaction of the effort sent him flying many feet up and away from the surface of the tiny planetoid. Dale cursed at the delay as he drifted down with nightmare slowness. At last his feet found solidity, and he shuffled painfully toward the twisted wreckage of what, but a short time before, had been the finest, fastest rocket ship in space. "He still at it, George?" asked Third Officer Tom Black. "Yes, Tom." George Whitley let his fingers fall from the keys of his ancient portable typewriter. "You've interrupted me at an awkward moment, blast you. My bold hero is just about to assemble his secret weapon out of the junk pile which, but 5 short seconds before, was the finest and fastest rocket ship in the whole solar system. Let him wait, anyhow. He needs putting in his place, and there's time for at least one gin before dinner." "Thanks. What do you think I came in for?" "Here's hoping that your bold hero tickles the fancy of the editor of Stellar Stories. But what did you mean when you said he needed putting in his place?" "I didn't—" "Oh, you mean that awful twerp Quentin Dale?" "Well, every author now and again gets to the point when he downs tools and says to his characters, 'Say, listen, who's writing this story, me or you?' Sometimes the cows seem to develop completely independently of your intentions, heaven knows why. But there must be some reason." "I suppose so. How's this? Suppose that, by some chance, you hit upon some facet of your own character, or perhaps persona is the better word, that's buried in your subconscious. You dig it out, and it expands, develops. Why not?" Black refilled his glass. "Very ingenious for a second mate. Reminds me of a case of schizo-what's-it. You know, dual personalities and all that. But it will only apply to the authors of normal, respectable fiction." "Why?" demanded Whitley, not without indignation. "Just this. Conan Doyle may quite easily have had a submerged self who was a great detective. Or Chesterton, or Wallace, or Van Deen. But how does the poor man's H.G. Wells dredge up astronauts from his subconscious? Gin stimulates the brain, said Whitley slowly. At least it stimulates mine. He took a man-sized swallow of cerebral stimulation. Ah, got it. J.W. Dunn and all that. What's J.W. Dunn? Don't be funny. You've read An Experiment with Time, of course. No? Then it's high time you did. Anyhow, Dunn tries to prove that during sleep, the old subconscious is liable to wander ahead along the fourth dimension. Time, to you, and that, in consequence, one dreams premonitory dreams. You can regard your world line as the four-dimensional track along which your spark of consciousness travels, from the cradle to the grave. But, says Dunn, he assumed the air of one imparting a vital secret, it takes time to do this. So what? Demanded Black. Sorry. My own spark of consciousness seems to have jumped the track. It's all very involved and complicated, but I should imagine that if you take advantage of the potential immortality of the germ plasm, in other words, if you have children, your world line will be prolonged into the infinite future. Get the idea? From somewhere not so far away came dull, heavy thuds, felt rather than heard. The two officers looked at each other in silence, each asking the same unspoken question. Depth charges, said Whitley at last. Probably, he added without conviction, the escort putting the fear of God into the stragglers. Hope you're right, replied Black unhopefully. Well, thanks for the party, George. He glanced at his watch. I'd better be getting up top to relieve old Picasso for his dinner. Whitley had another gin with Picasso, otherwise Mr. Claude Jenkins, chief officer, when that worthy came down from the bridge for his evening meal. George Whitley was sleeping. Dimly, the alleyway light shone through his thin door curtain, revealing the details of his room, the inviting bunk with its clean white sheets and pillows, the blue silk pajamas neatly folded at its head. But, fully clothed, Whitley was sleeping on his settee. Ready to hand were his short Wellington boots, his life jacket, and his panic bag, this latter containing such little comforts as its owner deemed necessary for an open boat voyage. The long, thin form twitched violently. George Whitley was in the throes of a nightmare. As he straightened his back, the reaction of the effort sent him flying many feet up and away from the surface of the tiny planetoid. Whitley Dale cursed the delay as he drifted down with nightmare slowness. At last his feet found solidity, and he shuffled painfully toward the twisted wreckage of what, but a short time before, had been the finest, fastest rocket ship in space. He couldn't help grinning to himself as, through sheer force of habit, he used the airlock instead of entering by any of the half-dozen gaping apertures in the hull of his vessel. Minutes passed while he removed the casing from the converter. More minutes passed whilst he fumbled among its intricacies for the little bar magnet, and all the time that voice at the back of his mind was screaming, "Is there time?" But at last he had what he wanted, and no positron blast had come screaming down from the black sky. And then he was making the last touches to his weapon, the weapon that was to have meant the end of free men everywhere, but which would now mean that government of the people, by the people, for the people, would not perish. Against the black backdrop of space, tiny points of light appeared, the Aryan cruisers lifting over the rim of the little world. Cruisers? But surely that was a battleship of the Hermann Göring class. I must be important, thought Whitley Dale. I'll take the big fella first. The sights of the weapon were crude, as was the weapon itself. It resembled nothing so much as a rather symmetrical spider's web of wire mounted on a rough tripod. but it worked. Surprisingly, there was no flash, no indication that power from Red Star's emergency batteries was being fed into it. At first, Whitley Dale feared that, after all, it was not working. Then he became aware of a sense of almost intolerable strain, a feeling that the very foundations of space and time were built upon shifting sand. He swung the weapon a little to the left. Obviously, his estimated deflection was a little out, or perhaps his sights were far from accurate. Hermann Göring dissolved into a vast cloud of impalpable dust as the intangible bonds that bound molecule to molecule within her huge structure were abruptly loosened. "Next, please!" shouted Whitley Dale, his voice within the helmet of his spacesuit a giant's bellow. He felt like a giant. But his makeshift materials, his hasty construction, could stand just so much. The sense of strain became intolerable. Then something snapped. The weapon disintegrated into a puff of metallic dust, and Whitley Dale spun down, and down, into a black vortex to a horrid, shrill clangor of bells. A dim spark of consciousness stirred in Quentin Dale's brain. He was, he realized, lying supine on something soft. His spacesuit had been removed. About his body he felt the texture of unfamiliar clothing. "I'm not dead," he thought. "I must be a prisoner." He realized suddenly that the urgent clamor of alarm bells was still in his ears. He opened his eyes, found himself in what appeared to be a ship's cabin, but the dim light that penetrated the thin curtain screening an open door convinced him that this was no prison cell aboard an Aryan cruiser. But where was he? His surroundings fitted nothing in his whole experience. Beneath his feet, for he had by now risen to a sitting posture, the deck gently rose and fell. From somewhere outside came shouts, the thud of distant, heavy explosions, and frequent short, staccato bursts of sharper detonations. Automatically, Dale pulled on a pair of short boots, thrust his arms into the sleeves of a gold-braided jacket. Some instinct seemed to propel him through the open door into a short alleyway, and then through another door to the open air. The cold darkness was abruptly shattered by the hard, white brilliance of some kind of aerial flare. By its light, he made his way up a ladder to a sort of open platform. Before the flare died, he saw the strange shapes of what appeared to be weapons with their crews crouching behind them. Then, from all sides, the shadows rushed in. It was very dark. Out of the darkness came a voice, deep and rich, the voice of one accustomed to command. "Is that you, Whitley?" Dale made a noncommittal noise. "Good. Mr. Black has gone aft to his 6-inch blunderbuss, so you'd better hold the fort up here." Feet clattered up the bridge ladder. "Ah, here are the others. Keep a lookout on the port side, Mr. Jenkins. Mr. Holmes, stay here with me. You'd better make sure that all the secret papers are ready for dumping. Mr. Whitley?" "Aye, aye, sir," said Dale automatically. Why did I say that? He wondered. Why am I talking and understanding archaic English? But something in my mind seems quite at home here, wherever here is. I'd better let nature take its course till I get the hang of things. His subconscious mind seemed to take charge. His feet, or were they Whitley's feet, carried him round all kinds of half-seen obstacles into a dimly lighted room. The first thing to attract his attention was what appeared to be a calendar. It was. He looked, unable to believe his eyes. And then, standing in the middle of the chart room, he uttered words and combinations of words with which the white-painted bulkheads were already quite familiar, and words and combinations of words which the passage of 5 centuries will add to man's vocabulary. All the evidence at his disposal led him to one irrefutable fact. He had been thrown back 500 years in time. Luckily, when George Whitley created Quentin Dale, he created a first cousin to the Superman. But did he create Quentin Dale? Was Quentin Dale dredged up from his own subconscious, no more than the hitherto submerged half of a case of split personality? In that case, where did Quentin Dale get his technical knowledge from? But let's get on with the washing. Dale's first concern was to get things straightened out. The high-powered brain got to work. Obviously, the disastrous failure of the decoherer was to blame, but how? True, there had been the sense of strain experienced during its operation, but Dale knew enough of the theory of time travel to know that A, it was impossible, and B, the mechanics of the decoherer fitted in with none of the orthodox lines of approach. Yet another new weapon used by his enemies? Dale smiled grimly. He would have known of that. Chance supplied the correct answer to the question. As Dale, who had been resting his elbows on the chart table, straightened his back, he found himself staring at his own reflection. The chart room windows, backed as they were by wooden blackout screens, made a mirror of sorts, but it wasn't his own reflection. Instead of the familiar pale blue eyes, dark brown ones stared back at him. The head was topped with black hair, whereas he had been of an almost ashen blondness. The face was utterly dissimilar, long and lean and far from cheerful-looking. Yet was it so dissimilar? There was a certain haunting familiarity. It could be the face of a long-dead and gone ancestral Dale. Quentin Dale wished that he had read and studied more of Malinowski's works on the race subconscious. Here, he was convinced, lay the answer to the question. Yes, something on those lines would explain the feeling he had had that he was sharing somebody else's brain, a somebody buried just below the surface of his own conscious mind. And this was the most frightening part, a somebody who might return to take full charge at any moment. But there was work to do. Dale concentrated on this business of secret papers, then let his mind go blank. Once again, nature took its course, and he found himself with his hands on a large, weighted bag. Good. With one swift movement, he upended the bag over the table, then, with the practiced fingers of a master spy, began to shuffle through the contents. Everything was there. In an incredibly short space of time, Dale had imprinted on his mind a quite accurate picture of the state of affairs prevailing in the 20th century world. He knew who was fighting who, and he knew what weapons were being employed by both sides. An official-looking letter demanded his attention. The success of the whole campaign depends upon the maintenance of supplies. The convoy must get through. The convoy must get through, repeated Dale, unconsciously stiffening to attention. Stirring times. Perhaps even now he could make use of his hard-earned knowledge, but could he remember? The germ of an idea began to develop in his mind. "What do you think you're doing, Mr. Whitley?" Quentin Dale spun around. A small, stout man was standing in the starboard doorway, obviously the owner of the voice that had addressed Dale out of the darkness. He was attired in a blue uniform with 4 gold bands on each sleeve, and the peak of his cap was crusted with gold. "What are you staring at, man? Anyone would think that you had never seen me before, or that I had suffered some sea change into something rich and strange." With his last words, his voice took on an organ-like quality. Dale played for safety and once again made his non-committal noise. "I don't know what modern officers are coming to," exclaimed the brass-bound individual. "They send me here, and what do I find? A chief officer who should have been a ruddy artist, a second officer whose only literary diet is blood and thunder and popular science, and who spews up the half-digested results onto sheets of virgin typewriter paper, and then When he should be doing a vitally important job, he moons around the chart room, thinking up plots for his next epic. Pah! Dale's training as an intelligence officer stood him in good stead. "I was looking for the CRS-3, sir," he lied smoothly. With a bellow, the captain dived into the pile of paper. "Here it is," he shouted triumphantly, "right under your ruddy nose." "Thank you, sir." Dale busied himself putting the papers back into the bag. The little man's anger seemed to have evaporated. Perhaps he was only playing a part, the part of an irate sea captain. "Well, Whitley," he said, "the fun and games seem to be over. Black reckons that the poor old Karangala caught it. Anyhow, it was somebody out on the starboard quarter who was torpedoed. You know," he went on, "I'm getting tired of this war. We all are." He struck an attitude and declaimed, "Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day to the last syllable of recorded time. That's what it feels like, Whitley. As though we've been at war all our lives, and will be at war all our lives. One long round of strain, worry, station-keeping, fog, ice. And all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. Or should it be watery death?" He lapsed into silence. "Well, Mr. Whitley, it's late. I'll write up my night orders and turn in. To sleep, perchance to dream. Aye, there's the rub. But I shan't dream much tonight. Here you are." He pushed a small book across the table to Dale. "Course and speed to Commodore's orders," he read. "Call me at once in the event of enemy activity or any deviation from normal routine. J. Taylor, Master." Before Dale signed, he surreptitiously turned back a page to see what his own, or Whitley's, signature was supposed to look like. Also, he wished to satisfy himself as to the names and rank of the other officers. A diminutive, brass-bound youth entered the chart room, bearing a large teapot. "Will you have your tea up here, sir?" he asked the captain. "No, thank you, Watkins. I'll brew myself a mug of cocoa in my room. Good night, Mr. Whitley. I hope you have a quiet watch. I shall be on my settee if you want me." "Shall I pour out yours now, sir?" piped the cadet. For that, Dale decided, must be his rank. "Yes, please, Watkins." He glanced at the clock. 23:45. That meant, probably, that he was on watch at midnight. As he gulped the last of his tea, he heard the, to him, unfamiliar sound of helmsmen and gunners being relieved. A bell rang sharply. For a moment he feared that it was the alarms again, but it appeared to be only a telephone bell. After a moment's hesitation, he put his empty cup down on the tray, then made his way out into the windy darkness. He finally found Black on the lee side of the bridge, propped against the telegraph. "Say," declaimed that worthy in sepulchral tones, "what, is Horatio there?" "A piece of him," replied Dale, with more truth than Black guessed. "So, you've been swatting up your Hamlet, George, to try to get into Pop's good books. I'm surprised and pained. They were very keen on Shakespeare at my school," explained the free Martian, omitting to add that Shakespeare was one of the links binding them to the world to which they all hoped one day to return. Then Black delivered himself of a long string of utter incomprehensibilities. "She's turning 80, he said, "to make 13.5. She's right abeam of old Dimwit now." Dale peered into the darkness and could just make out a black shape that might have been half a mile distant. "He wasn't bad, this last watch," Black continued. I think he must have given his engineers a good bottling. I haven't been above 83 or below 79. She's averaged 81.6. Oh, the course. North 70 east true. 10 degrees westerly error. Makes north 80 east compass on top. It's north 77 east down here, but I'm steering 80 to keep her in. Have you got her? I suppose so. Not very enthusiastic, are you, George? Sorry I had to ring the alarm bells and get you all up, but it couldn't be helped. It looked as though just one sub managed to slip through the screen. He got Karangala, and the escort got him. I wish I could have had a shot at him with old Betsy. Oh, by the way, the mate asked me to get you to tell your dog to jibe him, and especially good shout at one bell. That's all, I think. I'll write up the log and retire to my virtuous couch. Night-night. Tell my dog? Puzzled Dale, pacing up and down as he worried. He had far more important things to worry about, but even his Superman's mind was not immune to little, essentially human illogicalities. Tell my dog? Abruptly, he found himself in a compartment in which an elderly man stood peering intently into a dimly lighted bowl, his hands grasping the spokes of a polished wooden wheel. "Mr. Whitley, sir," he complained, "I wish you'd get your cadet to give her a drop of oil. She's squeaking something terrible, she is, and that stiff I can hardly get the wheel over. The oil can's not in its proper place, sir. I looked when I came on watch, but young Wild, he knows where it is. I saw him using it yesterday afternoon." "Wild?" called Dale. A tall, thin lad entered the wheelhouse, wearing a uniform similar to that in which he had seen Watkins. A cadet, obviously, possibly the mysterious dog. "Find the oil can, Wild, and give her a drop of oil." "Aye, aye, sir." "And put it back in its proper place in future." "Yes, sir." I should imagine, thought Dale, that the functions of a cadet will have changed very little throughout the ages. I sincerely hope that I'm right. He wandered outside. It seemed to him that the black shape to starboard was much closer. Also, that it had changed its relative bearing. The most annoying part of it all was that the obvious orders he should have given were on the tip of his tongue, just below the surface of his conscious mind. He knew somehow that in an emergency he would automatically do and say the right things, but this knowledge was of little comfort at the present moment. Then, from the bridge of his next abeam, a very dim blue light began to flicker. "Wild!" shouted Dale. "Sir?" "Here's some signaling practice for you. See what he wants." From somewhere, the cadet produced a night signaling torch. Finally, the light aboard the flagship flickered out for the last time. "Well, what does he say?" "5 cables, please. Repeat, please." What do you reckon our distance off is?" "About 2.5 cables, sir." "Good. And we're steering, 80 down here. If you were me, what would you do?" "The course should be 77, sir, so I think I'd pull her out to 74 till I was back on station." Good enough. Pull her out to 74, Wild, and let me know when you think she's the correct distance." The cadet called into the wheelhouse. "The second mate wants you to steer north 74 east, Burkett." Dale began to feel greatly relieved. "Now, Wild," he remarked, "would you say that, apart from being too close, she was in station?" "No, sir, she's a little astern." "What would you do about it?" "Well, sir, she's turning 80 now, so I'd put her up to 82. "Would that be enough?" No, sir. I think you're right. The Commodore seems to be forging ahead quite fast." "Put her up to 84 then, and let me know when you think she's right." Wilde went to an instrument that Dale had been almost sure was some kind of communication instrument, but to where, he had no idea. "Up 4 to 84, please," he ordered. So the watch was passed, the free Martian ostensibly testing the knowledge of his cadet, but in reality using the lad's practical experience to supplement the quite extensive theoretical grounding that he had gained from his hasty perusal of the secret books and papers. Finally, at about 0340, the one little mystery that still bothered Dale was solved. "Shall I call the chief and fourth now, sir?" asked Wilde. "Yes, give them a good shout." So, Wilde was the dog. Quentin Dale managed to hand over the watch without arousing suspicion. The chief and fourth officers were both far too busy getting their mugs of strong tea to notice any subtle difference in George Whitley or to take more than a purely academic interest in the convoy. As soon as he could, Dale went below. By this time, he had a good working knowledge of the geography of the bridge and was able to regain his own room without barking his shins more than twice. Before he dared sleep, and sleep was the one thing he craved, there were things to do. First, he had to get some idea of Whitley's personality. As an intelligence officer, he was used to prying, but even so, he found the reading of another man's private papers definitely abhorrent. But after all, I'm using his body, he told himself. The result of his investigations was even worse than he had feared. Whitley was married. That in itself was sufficient embarrassment, but in addition he had a girlfriend in New York, 2 in New Zealand, 3 in Australia, and 1 in Cape Town. Looking at their photographs, Dale decided that he would like to meet them all one day, but not collectively. A folder full of typewritten pages received only a cursory glance. It showed Dale what his hobby was supposed to be, but he had no time now to read any of Whitley's stories. Next, the bookshelf drew his attention. It almost broke Dale's heart to have to ignore the novels, the works on sociology and history, but he had to concentrate on the technical books. Luckily, they were all there. Navigation, seamanship, meteorology, shipmaster's business. When the steward brought in the second officer's morning tea, Dale, still seated at the desk, felt confident that he could, if necessary, pass for extra master. One of the seamanship books Dale had read might have been written for the benefit of those in similar circumstances. For reasons best known to himself, the author had wasted quite a few pages on sea routine. Had it not been for this, Black would have gone hungry, for the free Martian would never have guessed that he was supposed to relieve the bridge for breakfast. However, he assumed that, as the senior, he had fed first and, full of ham and eggs, climbed the ladders to the bridge. "In a hurry to get down at 4, weren't you?" Black greeted him. "Not especially. Why?" "You forgot to write up your log, that's all. You'd better do it now, before Pop comes up and noses around the chart room." Dale found a large, flat book labeled Log. But what did he put in it? However, the remarks for midnight and 0800 were a guide. The barometer, he assumed, wouldn't have altered much between 0000 and 0400. Neither would the air temperature. She must have done about the same speed for his watch as for the others. That took care of the patent log. The weather must have been about the same. "Slight to mod sea," he wrote. "Low swell, overcast, clear." In short, he cooked it, but nobody would ever be any the wiser. The weather was still overcast, so he had no opportunity to shoot the sun with the primitive sextant and obtain a position line. However, he felt confident of his ability to run up a perfectly good noondead reckoning. After all, in his other life, he was qualified to navigate in 3 dimensions. Black returned. Dale went inside to wind the chronometers. What perfect museum pieces, he thought. Wouldn't old Bergenstrom love them for his collection? Having finished his routine work, he browsed through the secret papers once more. It was then that the idea which had been slowly germinating in his mind for the last few hours blossomed forth in all its glory. Why not? He asked himself. Why not? It is obvious that this is a vitally important convoy. Perhaps in the past, my past, the convoy didn't get through. Perhaps its failure to deliver supplies just tipped the scales in favor of an Aryan victory. Now, he busied himself with dividers over a small scale chart. In a day, we shall be well inside the range of shore-based bombers. It's obvious that the Aryans, or the Nazis, as they seem to call themselves now, will do their best to wipe us up. What can I do about it? With his mind's eye, he saw a blueprint, the blueprint he had stolen from the Chicago arsenal. That's it, he told himself. It'll get this convoy through, and in any case, it'll mean that the United Nations will win hands down. But can I make it? I've got no polarium, but copper should do. A little later, the third engineer was talking to the first electrician. They're all nuts on deck, he declared, from the old man down. You should have seen the list of stuff that the second mate wanted the loan of. He sent young Wild along just now. Maybe he's making a rocket ship. I know, sympathized the electrician. He's borrowed my soldering iron, too, rigging up Limelight for Pop's stage, probably. Meanwhile, Quentin Dale was busy assembling, for the second time, the Aryan's secret weapon. This time, he felt sure, it would work well. There wasn't the same desperate haste, and his fingers were not hampered by the heavy gloves of a spacesuit. Dale sat at his desk, busy with pencil, scratch pad, and tables. He wasn't quite happy about the copper wire. If only he had the data. He reached up to Whitley's bookshelf in the hope that Hogben's Science for the Citizen would meet his requirements. Entered Tom Black. What ho, George, and how's Quentin Dale? Dale started violently, dropping the book. How did you know? He gasped. Why, the guilty conscience. Have you decided to do away with the poor cow? A pity. I rather liked him. Well, admitted Dale, his existence just now is rather, shall we say, redundant. After all, he has no real place here and now. What does that matter? As long as you keep him in his place, why worry? Or are you thinking of trying time travels? You know, George, he went on, there's one point where you blokes always slip up. You have somebody traveling back in time, and he immediately starts playing merry hell with his environment by making all kinds of fancy gadgets peculiar to his own day and age. But it can't be done. How did you know? Asked Dale again. Oh, so you are you? Quentin Dale changes history, I suppose. Well, here's the rub. Suppose I'm he groped for a word. A Frenchman. I'll naturally be brought up with the idea that if Napoleon had won the Battle of Waterloo, it would have been a good thing. Now I, with my good, though I say it who shouldn't, working knowledge of the Lewis gun, am sent back in time. I decide to do perfidious Albion a bit of no good, and supply Napo with MGs. But can I make one? There just aren't the materials or the tools to make either the guns or the ammunition. But this will work, said Dale quietly. What are you talking about? Luckily, at this moment, there came a tap on the door. Yes, sung out Black. Captain's compliments, gentlemen, and will you join him in a gin before dinner? Command performance, said the third officer. But come, and let us see the Drury Lane Dane slain." Standing on Captain Taylor's table was a beautiful little model, a toy stage, complete with curtains and footlights. On the desk, a few feet away, were what appeared to be all the apparatus, in miniature, to produce any desired lighting effect. "What shall it be this evening, gentlemen?" asked the captain, dispensing gin, lime juice, and bitters. "Let me see. We did Macbeth last, didn't we? Come in, Wild. A lemonade for you, young man. I wish we could abandon the old Elizabethan custom of having the female parts played by boys. Somehow I just can't imagine Wild as a tragedy queen." "What about Hamlet? Mr. Jenkins has kindly made me some new scenery and some new characters, to my specifications, of course." He fumbled in a large box. "Now, what do you think of this?" The two officers and the cadet stared at the beautifully made and costumed little figure. At last, "Isn't he just a little gloomy for Polonius, sir?" asked Black. "Polonius, Polonius." Taylor made the name sound like a malediction. "You see a fat man, so at once your enfeebled wits must have it that it is one of the immortal bard's comic creations. Read your Shakespeare, Mr. Black. Read him carefully, all of you. And what authority do you find for the all too prevalent assumption that the Prince of Denmark was a long, thin streak of misery? None, sir. On the contrary, does not the Queen say in Act 5, Scene 2, 'He's fat and scant of breath'? There, friends, you have the essential tragedy of Hamlet. A fat man, not blessed with the nature that so often seems to go with that build, but gloomy and introspective. None will take him seriously, none, that is, but the poor, mad Ophelia. Small wonder, then, that such a nature turns and feeds upon itself. But we will set the stage for the first scene of the tragedy." With his pudgy but surprisingly deft hands, he set up scenery cunningly cut from plywood. In the background frowned the battlements of the royal castle at Elsinore. Front, left, Taylor placed a small, gaudily caparisoned figure armed with a long halberd. He made adjustments to his miniature footlights, then switched off the lights of his room. Abruptly, the scene ceased to be make-believe. The dim radiance from the front of the stage simulated the light of a waning moon, and the little mannequin that was Francisco at his post seemed to shift and stir uneasily. "You take Francisco, Black, and then Marcellus. Whitley, you can take Bernardo. I will take Horatio and, of course, the ghost. Here, you'll need these." He handed out little paper-covered volumes of Hamlet. Dale found that just enough light came through the curtained ports to enable him to read the small print. The play proceeded. Ghosts seemed to fill the room with their almost tangible presence. Only the tiny, brilliantly lighted stage seemed real. All else was illusion. Tableau succeeded tableau, and the words spoken by the four who were at one, players and spectators, seemed to come from outside. Ghosts filled the room, the ghosts of all who had read and watched and played Shakespeare, the ghosts of all who would read and watch and play the master playwright of all time. Elizabethan lords and ladies were there, smug Victorians, the tortured generations of the interregnum. And mingling with them were ghosts who had no place on earth, the spirits of those millions of the Martian colonists who had looked upon the Bard of Avon as the symbol of the world to which they would one day return. Dale remembered vividly the last time he had seen Hamlet played. It was at New Stratford, at the Shakespeare Memorial Theatre. Boris Fyodorov had produced it. Etienne Giraud had played the lead. Yes, it had been great, but somehow this little toy stage with its little toy actors seemed more real than any detail of his past life. What else had he seen? There was that fantastically surrealist production of The Tempest. Unbidden, the lines came into his head. We are such stuff as dreams are made on, and our little life is rounded with a sleep. We are such stuff as dreams are made on, he whispered. Suddenly the pieces of the puzzle fell together in his mind. He knew that if he were to read Whitley's manuscript, he would find therein his own name, his own life. Was this all that he was, then? The phantasm of the disordered imagination of some poor scribbler striving vainly after a perfection of style that he would never reach? How did it go? All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players? Something like it, anyhow, and if he were just a player conjured up from nothingness for the delectation of Whitley's hypothetical public, then he would play his part to the best of his ability. And all the while, he was now playing Rosencrantz, he responded automatically to his cues. Finally, Black, who was speaking for the miniature Polonius, hissed in a conspiratorial whisper, "I hear him coming. Let's withdraw, my lord." This was Captain Taylor's big moment. He rose to his feet, struck an attitude of tragic indecision. He cleared his throat, but before he could begin, Dale, still in his reverie, took the cue. To be or not to be, that is the question, he began. To be or not to be, he repeated slowly. And then the clamor of the alarm bells shrilled throughout the ship. "Savaged by the gong!" shouted the irrepressible Black. Low and fast, in line-ahead formation, the bombers came in. Low and fast, they roared in from the darkling east, themselves poor targets against the dusky sky, but with the convoy silhouetted against the afterglow. From the ships came the bright orange flashes of exploding cordite, puffs of dirty white-brown smoke, as the long-range weapons took up the challenge. Then, above the barking of the high-angle guns, was heard the frenzied rattling of the automatic weapons as the range rapidly closed. The sky was alive with tracer. Black, as fire control officer, had run to his telephone and was shouting into the mouthpiece, "12-pounder, barrage commence! Orlikons, hold your fire till I give the word!" From the poop came the ear-piercing yelp of the little high-angle gun, and puffs of black smoke from its bursting shells were added to those already stripling the sky. "Gun upon gun, huzzah! Don John of Austria has loosed the cannonade," said Dale to himself as he raced for the short ladder leading to the Monkey Island. In a few moments, Don John could take his obsolete guns and... Yes, there stood the weapon, balanced on its tripod of brass curtain rods, like some spider's web of copper wire. But strange flies were caught in this web, a bar magnet, valves filched from the Echo sounding machine. Tapped from the wiring which supplied light to the standard compass was the power lead. Dale switched on the power. As he did so, he heard Captain Taylor bellowing, "Mr. Whitley! Mr. Whitley! Come down at once! Get under cover, you fool!" A new noise was heard above the devil's orchestra of high-angle fire and bursting bombs. A thin, shrill whining, felt rather than heard. A flickering, violet coruscation ran over the network of wiring, barely visible in the dusk. At once, Dale knew what was going to happen. His hand hovered over the switch, then fell to his side. He knew that the weapon would disintegrate as it had done before, or would do again. But he knew this time what would happen to himself. If, as he feared, he was no more than a mere, hitherto submerged, facet of Whitley's personality, then he would sink into oblivion when the true Whitley was jolted back. If, as he hoped, his future world really existed then, if he succeeded in tipping the scales and changing the course of history, it would cease to be. No Quentin Dale, no Leonora Starr. and all so that a third-rate scribbler could continue to enjoy the caresses of his meretricious women in half the seaports of the world. Dale smiled, a bitter, twisted smile. "No," he told himself. "There's more at stake than that." Meanwhile, on the bridge, things were going far from well. Captain Taylor had ceased bellowing for his second officer, as he had far more important matters to engage his attention. For on the Monkey Island, powerful magnetic forces had come into play. A blue pole of such intensity as to affect the compass needles of ships 2 miles away was dragging at the north, seeking ends of the compass needles of those same ships. The entire front line of the convoy was converging upon the unfortunate Captain Taylor. Telegraphs rang frantically, and he pulled clear ahead with a split second to spare. Astern, the Commodore and the next abeam to port collided. A silence had fallen over the ships, a silence broken only by the ever-diminishing roar of the Luftwaffe bombers. Fire control officers and gunners alike gazed at the heavens with a wild surmise, watching the fast, silent doom that was overtaking each attacking plane. "You were wrong," shouted Dale from the Monkey Island. "You were wrong, Don John. This is where Quentin Dale changes history." And the sense of unbearable strain became ever more acute, and the shrill whining rose in pitch and volume till it seemed that neither human minds nor ears could endure it. The very air seemed to quiver, until it seemed to those standing on the bridge that they were peering through water at the vague, unstable outlines of long sunken ships, and that the great black shapes of the bombers were some kind of monstrous devilfish. By this time, the attackers had learned that some new weapon had been brought into play. The first plane, and the second, and the third, had dissolved into a puff of impalpable dust. Those following had taken evasive action, only to be hunted down, one by that invisible lethal beam evidently projected from one of the ships of the convoy. Finally, of all that air armada, but one plane remained. He twisted and turned, he looped and dived, but he would not return to his base. The pilot was either very brave or very stupid. It would seem that his duty was to report to his superiors on land a first-hand account of the new weapon, but he was determined to press home the attack. Dale could have sworn that he clipped a wingtip, was willing to stake his bottom dollar that he had shorn away at least half the Nazi's tail, but the bomber looped and banked, dived and climbed, and refused to return to base. A sense of nightmare urgency possessed Dale. He had to wipe the sky clean of Goring's bravos before he returned to his own time, or limbo. The feeling of strain increased to an unbearable intensity. The dim violet glow along the web of wiring became, incontinently, a blinding radiance. Somewhere, something snapped. On the bridge, the tragic little fat man had become one with the tragic little fat man on his toy stage. "To be or not to be, that is the question," he declaimed. "Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows." Then the great Shakespearean actor-manager realized, suddenly, that the boards he trod were not the boards of a stage. But Mr. Jenkins was not interested in his commander's bewilderment. He, using the back of a chart, was sketching rapidly a seascape on which the ships of the convoy sailed in all their beauty. Helmsmen, gunners, sat and stood around in snug, private, happy wish-fulfillment dream worlds. On Monkey Island, a dazed and bewildered George Whitley watched a vagrant eddy swirl a handful or so of very fine metallic dust about his feet. This was Tom Black's big moment. It is the dream of every junior officer to have all his seniors put, harmlessly and painlessly, of course, hors de combat, and to be left to run the show in his own way. And normally, Tom Black was a happy man. When the AB at the wheel was replaced in a split second by a perfectly useless barman, the ship became completely out of control. She swung athwart the line of advance of the convoy, lay in the trough of the swell, and constituted a first-class menace to navigation. Black could see that all his seniors were far from capable of dealing with the situation. He had no desire to take the wheel himself, for, cooped up in the armored wheelhouse, his field of view would have been restricted. "Wild!" he shouted. Like Black, Wild's one desire was to excel at his profession. "Sir? Grab the wheel, quick!" His mind working with supernormal speed and clarity, the third officer could see that he had no hope of pulling clear by putting his helm hard to port. He knew his ship, and she was notoriously sticky on a port turn. He could, of course, have used the engines, but that would mean the loss of steerage way, and the prospect of backing and filling in the middle of that onrushing mob of big, fast ships did not appeal to Black. "Hard a starboard!" he shouted, at the same time giving the orthodox one short blast on his whistle. She swung fast. "Ease the helm, midships! Steady!" End on, Black rushed to meet the convoy. Black's feat of seamanship would have been easy had the various ships been in their correct stations, but they weren't. The air attack and later the confusion caused in the front line by Dale's weapon had contributed to a state of chaos. All that could be said about the fleet of transports was that they were all going approximately the same way at roughly the same speed. Whistles blew, telegraphs jangled, and captains cursed as Black swept through the disorganized horde of vessels. "I'm glad that's over," he said. "Now, I suppose I'd better get back into station, if they'll have me. Hard a starboard, Wild!" The drone of an airplane engine caught his ear. It was the last of the bombers. Like a vulture, it swooped down upon the lone ship, a ship away from the protection of the umbrella of fire that 500 itching trigger fingers were waiting to spread over the convoy. Perhaps the pilot knew that this was the ship on which the weapon had been mounted. Perhaps, having seen the confusion of which this same ship had seemed to be the focus, he assumed that the weapon had blown up and was no longer a menace to him and his kind. The 12-pounder opened up, aided and abetted by the after orlicons. Both shells and tracer missed astern. A great pillar of water rose suddenly, not 100 feet from the bridge. The ship seemed to stagger and swung involuntarily off her course. The bomber turned and came in for a second run. Whitley, who had come down from the Monkey Island, had enough of his wits about him to realize what was happening. He ran to the port orlicon, watched his tracer crawl up to the black shape dimly silhouetted against the first faint stars. Too low. He swung his gun, and the gun jammed. From right behind him came the frenzied chattering of a light machine gun. He saw tracer mount heavenward, reach the vast black shape, and vanish. The last of the bombers seemed to stagger in its flight, banked steeply, then fell into an almost vertical dive. Seconds later, it seemed, came the crash of its fall. Whitley turned his head to discover the identity of the master marksman. It was Watkins, the cherubic little cadet. Negligently, so negligently that Whitley ducked hastily behind the armor of the gun position, he held the still smoking, stripped Lewis that he had fired from the creak of his elbow with such deadly effect. "I fixed dem bums, mister," he piped in tones of quiet pride and an atrocious Bowery accent. "There ain't no guy can throw a pineapple at Wicked Wat, de wizard gunman, and live. I sure fixed dem bums." You've been listening to pre-1990s speculative fiction readings with a highlight on science fiction by Darrell T. Smith II. Please consider clicking the donation link in the description box. Thank you so much for your time and your imagination.